Folks, Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. This is another one of our teaching lessons. We are going to be in the third book. We went through Genesis and we went through Exodus. Now we're going to browse Leviticus. Now notice we're just browsing. There's 27 chapters and we're going to do these in a half hour or so. So this is just a browse of these chapters. Now Leviticus is in the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Bible. The Septuagint it was called, and this was the Hebrew Old Testament written in Greek. And it was the third book of the Pentateuch, which was the third book of the 5 books that Moses wrote. And that was what the Pentateuch was. Remember, it was pertaining to the Levites. That's the Levitical people, the people that God chose to follow him. That's He chose these people, and they were of the tribe of Levi. And so they were called Levites. And the objective was to modify the word book. And as they modified this book and they made it to be the Levitical thing, and they brought it down to 25 chapters, which it could have been multiple chapters of writing, where the tribe was from the priest. Now, the Levites were going to be the priest. What was a priest in that day? A priest in that day was the head spiritual man that leaded the spiritual things. He was prominent in every worship service. He had to be there. Nobody could step in his shoes and say, well, I'll stand in for him today because he's gone so-and-so or he's over so-and-so. No, the only way it could be done was if a priest was there and that priest stepped in. Now, each tribe had a priest. There were 12 tribes during this period of time. And each one of these tribes had a priest. And the priest was to be there and was to bring out the book. And they would read the book. By the way, we think that going to church for an hour or two and sitting in a comfortable pew or something, just think that the Levites had to stand up. Sometimes they brought the book out and it was a high day. They read all day long from sun up to sundown, and they stood while they read. And let me tell you something, standing over there is different than standing in the United States of America. Standing over there is standing in the hot sun in a desert place, and you're talking about thousands of people at one time. So the objective now was to have this book put out, and we use the word here modify, but it isn't really modify, it's to get them in sections, to get everything in sections. They weren't changing the word. When we use the word modify, it's not changing the word, it's to bring it into verse and chapter. And so that even you and I today can use it and understand it. Now, they did not have all verse and chapter in some of them. Some of them were just writing down 10 inches wide on a piece of skin of fabric, and they were just, the words were like this all the way down. No punctuation at all, just the words all the way down. It had to be put punctuation in it. God made a way for that to happen. And that worship service was chosen now in lieu of the firstborn sons of the tribe. So the firstborn son, Levi, of the Levites, the firstborn son was the one that was the head son in each tribe. And so we see that in Numbers 3 and 45, which we will get over there eventually, and we will read that and we will see that. At Sinai, the law had been given and the tabernacle erected before it was feasible for the Israelites to continue their journey to Canaan. They had to have a tabernacle, which was a worship place. You and I go to things called churches or synagogues or many other names used for places where we go and worship our God, the God of heaven, through His Son, Jesus Christ. And so we call them many different things. In that day, they were the synagogue, and that was where the spiritual hierarchy met and mused together, or all spoke together, and all brought up the things that Moses had done, and were writing them down, were penning them down, and Moses was penning them down, and they were reading them, and they were ciphering them out. It was necessary for them to have laws. It's necessary for everybody to have laws. Just think if we had no traffic laws. Everybody had a car. I haven't been there, but some people tell me in some countries you go to, it's like they don't have any law. You just drive any way you feel like it. If you can get through there, go on through. And so that's the way it is. But we got to have laws to guide us, just like they had to have laws to guide them, especially in that tabernacle worship. Otherwise, it would have been just helter-skelter. The services would have been like they were at the golden calf when Moses came off the mountain. And they were running naked and wild, and they were doing everything, and they were calling it worship. We have that today. We have every kind of statement today that you can imagine around this world that people call it themselves. They call it a religion. It may be a religion, but it's not God's religion. It's not God's. It is a mixture of satanic and works. Satanic works that aren't godly works are satanic works. And so these laws throughout the wilderness wanderings and were repetitious. They had to say them over and over again. They had to say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. And they had to over and over. Why did they have to do that? With people being born every day. There were children coming to fruition every day, to 4, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, and they started them reading the Levitical laws. And by the time they were 13, they had a thing called a bar mitzvah, which was that child had to start with the 10 Commandments and had to be able to read the whole law of God in his mind and quote it in his mind. And that's the way that worked. In addition to that, the explanation of the laws were given. So the priest came and he explained how these laws worked. And this is what Leviticus is. To you or I, this would seem like a very, very difficult time in the life of the people that God had chosen to follow him out of all the people on the earth. There was many, many, many people on the earth. The Levites were the special ones. They were the ones chose to serve God. But in that choosing, they were given many ritualistic laws that they had to follow ritualistically. And that's what God said. The Leviticus fills the integral role of the Pentateuch. The 5 books that Moses wrote, these 5 books are being kept by this group of people. Let's look at it, the familiar with Exodus. When we get to, we already went through Exodus. And when we get up to Numbers, it will clarify some things that we're reading in Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. Numbers will bring out some points that we will see after we have understood a little bit about Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus. It's all about knowledge, some knowledge. We will have some knowledge. All the knowledge of the book of the Bible, all 66 books. It takes years to have the knowledge of all 66 books. You could do it if you did it in a manner of browsing each one, which that's what we're doing right now. We're browsing these books, Leviticus, we're browsing it. It has 27 chapters. We could spend 27 days in it and never hardly touch the surface of it. We could spend 27 weeks in it and do a little bit of in-depth, but if we spent 27 months in it, a chapter per month, and did it every single day, we could pretty well cover the book. And even then we would not have all the understanding that we could have it as God worked with his people in that day. Understanding Leviticus. Some knowledge, Leviticus is necessary if one is to understand the religious activity of the Jews portrayed in the next couple chapters, Numbers and Deuteronomy. We have got to know something about Genesis, something about Exodus, and a whole lot about Leviticus if we're going to know something about Numbers and Deuteronomy. If we skip Leviticus, go to Numbers and Deuteronomy, we're not going to have the picture that we would have if we use this book. Well, this book is a link. It's a very important link to understanding these next few books that we're going to look at. Now, the rest of the Old Testament and the purpose of Leviticus may define as the calling attention to the depravity between God and man. But there is a depravity between God and man that's called holiness. Man has no holiness without God. The only holiness a man can have is if he has it in God. And the man's sinful and providing consecrate steps whereby man might restore the fellowship which has been lost in the result of his own defilement. How did that defilement come? That defilement came in the name of sin. When Eve sinned and handed Adam whatever that fruit was, and Adam sinned, that was the thing that deprived man from his connection with God. It moved him from being connected. Remember, they were perfectly connected with God originally. And the laws connected with the restoration varied. They both are general and specific. They seek in one way or another to govern the whole life of the people of God. In this sense, Leviticus is the most thoroughly and the most logic book in the entire Old Testament. You say logic, logical. Is it logical to say that if you do this or you do that, you'll die? Just a seemingly a small thing? But God required perfect direction. When he gave direction, he meant it to be direction. And he said, this is what you follow. And this is how you do it. And so, throughout his laws is seen the unyielding demand. God didn't yield any gravity here. He says, no, this is a law, you follow it. We have a law in the United States of America that we drive on the right-hand side of the road at all times. When we're going, we're on the right-hand side, and we're coming back, we're on the right-hand side. We're facing traffic. We're facing traffic when we're on the right-hand side. If I wanted to break that law and say, well, I think today I'm going to go down there and I'm going to drive on the left-hand side of the road. How far do you think I'm going to go? I'm going to go until I meet the first car. It's going to be a head-on and we're both going to die because I broke the law. And that's the way it is in the Old Testament. When they broke the law, they could face death or a penalty. Throughout the laws that was seen, and it seemed like an unyielding demand, but it wasn't. It was just a fact. Ye shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now the Lord their God had chosen those people, and he was holy, and he had said, I want you to live holy. You're separated. You're a group of people. I'm building a tabernacle for you. I'm telling you how to build this tabernacle. Now in this tabernacle, you are going to sacrifice animals. You are going to bring that blood to a basin, and you're going to sacrifice, and the smoke is going to be a sweet smelling savor to me. And I'm going to reward you for what you're doing with allowing you to eat that meat. And you can eat the meat. So all you have to do is raise the animals, feed the animals, raise the animals. I'll provide the food. God provided the food for the animals. The people didn't provide it. God provided. You say, well, they grew it. Well, who made it grow? God made it grow. God provided the food for the animals, gave them the animals. They could take them in there. They could sacrifice them, and they could actually feast. They could actually feast. Now, they're in the desert. I don't know where they got all the fruit and the vegetables and all the things that they had. God had to provide a way for them to do that. Now, while they were in the desert, Jesus was the rock that followed them, that gave them the water to water the place so they could grow, so they can have something to drink. Animals can't live without water. People can't live without water. A very short time passes and a person passes away. There has no water. And so the water is important. Can you imagine one rock, Jesus Christ, giving them the freely the water flowing from that rock? And wow. And on the other hand, the climax of the book is clearly in chapter 16, in which the introductions are given to the Day of Atonement. This is a great day, the Day of Atonement. What is atonement? That's when something or somebody steps in your place and does something for you, and you don't have to do it. And they did it for you. On this day, God provided his people with a ceremony by means of which all their sins for the previous year were counted as forgiven. That was the Day of Atonement. Each year, all the people came together as a group, and God forgave them of their sins, and they atoned. They did a special sacrifice on that day. And the mercy which God displayed in this service foreshadowed the work of Christ in the 16th chapter has been called the most consummate, the best flower in the Bible is Jesus Christ. And here's the story of this flower coming, budding, blooming, growing up, sacrificing itself that we all may be delivered from the sacrificial law, and that we could go from grace from now on and live under grace. So we not only are we forgiven for the sins of last year, but we're forgiven of the sins of our total life, no matter how old we are, through this flower, Jesus Christ, if we'll ask him to forgive us. This is the mercy which God has displayed, and this was a foreshadow of the work in the 16th chapter, which has been called, it is the most consummated chapter in the Bible as going toward the Mosaic symbolism. In that day, it was called symbolism. It was the symbol of what was to come. And so it came. In addition of the laws, there are also some historical sections. In those laws, there are historical things. But these two are closely connected with the priesthood. Everything, remember, boils down to two people. One is God, the other is the devil. You're either going to boil your life down to serving God, or you're going to boil your life down to serving the devil. You cannot serve both at the same time, no more than you could drive both ways on the highway in one car at the same time. You can't do it. It includes the consecration of the priest in chapter 8 and 9, and the sin and punishment. And we had two guys that were brought up as an example. They were Nabal and Abihu in chapter 10, and the stoning of a blasphemer in chapter 24 and verse 10. In this connection, it is interesting to note that only one mention is made of the Levites, and that in that incident manner. There was only one mention of Levites in that manner. Now let's divide the book. Let's see how the book of Leviticus is divided. Now remember, this is just an overview. This is 27 chapters. And we're giving a little bitty synopsis, just an overview of what Leviticus is about. And it's just it's a little bitty thing that we're doing compared to what the whole scope of the whole laws concerning the sacrifice, chapters 1 through 7. The whole laws, this section of 5 types of offering are discussed: burnt offering, meal offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings. These fill out by the decisions of the sin offering as it is to be observed by various classes of individuals. I love the fact that for all of this work there's reward. In the physical there was reward. There not only was spiritual reward, but in the physical there was reward. Because all of these offerings, what happened to them? They weren't burned up and thrown away on a dunghill in ashes. They were used to eat. So they were working in these sacrificial things in the sacraments and allowed to eat those sacraments afterwards. And they were rewarded as individuals with something to eat. And we're all human beings and we all have to eat. And I suspect in that day, just like in any other day, people that worked hard ate heartily. And so they had feast and they had things. They had no refrigerator. They had no way unless they salted it down and made it, and then it wasn't ready to eat for months and months. It had to cure, salt cure. And so the historical section, number 2, featured the consecration of the priest, chapters 8 and 9, and the sin of Nadab and Abihu in chapter 10. A section on the that was in chapter 10. Let's just go for a second over there and look at chapter 10 for 1 second right here and get a quick synopsis of this these 2 guys right here and see where their problem was and what their situation was. In 10 it said, and Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein, the presence thereof, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. He commanded them not. Simple. They had this little thing. You've seen them today in the Jewish priest scenarios. They have a little censer thing, and they have an incense in it, and they put a chain on it. And the priest hadn't showed up. So Nadab and Abihu said, well, we're going to stand in. We're going to just do it for him. They were not officially signed by God to do that. So they come into the place of the Holy of Holies. They walk in out like they were something, and they were nothing, because they were not priests. And they put the incense in there and hung them on the chains, and God struck them dead, because they broke the law. And the law was stringent. The law was stringent. You could die. So in chapter 10 we see that. And then we go on down and let's look again at the book may divide as follows. Now we're going to get in the division of the laws concerning the sacrifice. That was 1 through 7. And we went on by, we've already been there. Now number 2. We already covered number 1, which covered 5 different things. And number 2, the historical section featuring the consecration of the priest. They had to be consecrated. Now, Nadab and Abihu weren't consecrated. They had to be consecrated, chapters 8 and 9. And then the sin of that Nadab and Abihu was in chapter 10. And then, now the third thing is, in this section, was the laws and the purification. Purification was very, very stringent and very important by God, that the ceremonial was to be uncleanliness. They had to have it. In chapters 11 through 5. These furnish instructions as the appropriate sacrifice and the ordinances for ridding oneself of impurity. Let me tell you a little something right here. As you're going to read this, you're going to read these Levitical laws. You're going to read some things. And we have some misguided statements today. One of the misguided statements we have today is that you can't eat fish and meat on the same day. That's not true. What the deal was, they were cutting fish on a board, and they were sweeping the skins off, and then they threw a piece of meat up there, and they were cutting the meat on the same board, and they caused themselves to get sick from the mixture of the germs that were with the two, and they didn't wash the board. So what they were to do is, when they were cutting fish, to wash the board afterwards, clean the board. They're out in the sunshine, or they're under a canvas, but they're in 90-degree heat or more, and it doesn't take long for flies to come along and multiply, and you've got germs, and the people eat it and die. And they thought they were dying because they were eating fish and meat on the same day. No, they were dying because it was unclean. So we find now, in the fourth thing is the Day of Atonement in chapter 16. That's one chapter by itself. Is one of the greatest chapters in this book is chapter 16, where God required some things of the people, and we see that how important it was. Now, the laws dealing with conduct of God's people, chapter 17 through 20. God always had a conduct for his people. And those that were outside of that, outside of the religious people, which God's people were called religious people. What did that mean? That meant that they were rightly separated from the rest of those people. They were separated. They were religious people, but they were rightly separated from the other people. And then there were ethical laws designed to accent the separation between Israel and the heathen nation. Now, their Levitical laws, the Levite laws, separated them from other people's laws and rules. And the Levites' laws were spiritual laws. Other people's laws were just rules that following the Ten Commandments, more or less. And laws concerning holiness and the priest was part of the Ten Commandments too. But the laws, thou shalt not kill, everybody was to follow that law. Even the person that wasn't saved was to follow that law. That was a physical law. And a decision of the holy days. We're going to find this discussion, of the holy days and the feast in chapters 23 and 24, which include some other things. They include the section of the Sabbath. They include the Passover day. You remember in the Old Testament, back where, well, we haven't got there yet, but the Passover lamb passed over where the blood, the Passover angel that was going to take the firstborn of every family, and the Israelites put the blood on the lintel and on the doorpost and on the sides and on the top and put it there. And that was the Passover, the feast of the first fruits and the harvest. And then we had the Pentecost, the Day of Atonement, and the day of the Feast of Tabernacles. You notice this word feast. Isn't it something? God asked them to do something for him, and in return, he gave them the sacrificial things to eat. So they had many feasts, and God was providing them with a day of feast. The preparation was not done in drudgery. The preparation was done in the fact, hey, we're doing this for God, and He's doing something for us. He's given us all of this victuals to eat. Man was designed to eat. He has to eat to stay alive. He has to eat to be healthy. He has to eat to grow. And isn't it nice to have something to eat that you like? And they prepared those victuals, and God gave them a way to prepare them victuals so that they wouldn't spoil or they wouldn't have... you remember the seething pot? Where they had thrown stuff in there. I believe the seething pot was poisoned because it wasn't purely cooked. It wasn't cooked enough. I know they threw something in there that was not good. But if they had boiled it enough, they could have boiled perhaps the poison out of it. But listen to this discussion of the holy days and the feast in chapter 23 and 24, which included in this section the Sabbath Passover. Now, we looked at that a few minutes ago. And that was the Passover, like the Passover lamb. And that's what we were just talking about. That was the Day of Atonement, Feast of the Tabernacles. And then we had the Jubilee year. This is talking about a year, 1 year of Jubilee. This is 1 year of feasting and worshiping and the God of heaven. Do you know the Bible says 1,000 years is as a day with the Lord? He's not in a hurry. Who's in a hurry in this world? Us creatures, us people that God made. We're in a hurry. We think we got to try to get everything possible and we can round up and get in a 24-hour day. And we push and push and push, and we work 12 hours. We work half of the day. God designed it where we were to work 8 hours and relax. Or we were to work a regular day, which back in Bible days was from sun up to sundown, about a 12-hour day. And then you had the Jubilee year. That was number 25, 25th chapter. And then we're promised the promises and threats connecting the obedience. There was promises for being obedient to the law, and there were threats for breaking the law. And that's in chapter 26. And last but not least, in chapter 27 is called the appendix. That is the end containing the law concerning the vows. Chapter 27. When God made a law, it was a vow. And He vowed that law to the people. And He said, keep that law, and I will keep you in perfect peace. And I can tell you today, if you've said, Jesus, I am a sinner, forgive me of my sin, come into my heart and save my soul, and you read His book, and you're in the vine, read chapter 15 of the book of John. See if you're in the vine. As we did some preaching this week, I talked to some people that were church-going people, and I said, are you in the vine? Do you find yourself getting up in the morning and say, thank you, Lord, for this day? Do you rush around or sit down and eat and just gobble your food down? You didn't even say, Lord, thank you for this food. That's called saying grace. Do you say grace? Are you God's child? The least you could do would be to thank Him for that meal. And so you ask the Lord, thank you for this meal. When you get in your car and you start down the road, my daddy never ever put that car in gear until he had prayer. Lord, bless this trip. Bless us as we go. Have us be obedient to you today. If there's a place to witness, have us witness there. Have us show you. So they go down to McDonald's and get a cup of coffee and a biscuit. And they go in there and they get the coffee and the biscuit. They bow their heads and have a word of prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this coffee and biscuit. And drink that coffee and biscuit. Somebody at another table walks over and says, hey, mister, I appreciate the fact that you did that. Very few people today recognize God enough to bow their head in public and thank God for something. Hey, it's important. Are you saved? Are you willing to embarrass yourself in this world today amongst a crowd of heathens? and pray? You come across an accident on the side of the road. Are you willing to pull over, get out, and say to the policeman, I'm a Christian. I want to pray for these folks that are pinned in that car. And you start praying, and you pray out loud, and you say, God, I want you to please help these folks that are in this car and deliver them. And let me talk to them. Maybe one day in the hospital zone, let me talk to them about their souls and find out if they're saved, and if the policeman or the fireman will let you get near enough to say, if you died right now, sir, man, would you go to heaven? You can. Just say this prayer in your heart to God, between you and God. Say, God, I am a sinner. Forgive me of my sin. Come in my heart and save my soul. If they die right there, they died and went to heaven instantly. And you were in there in the middle because you are following God. Are you that kind of Christian? What kind of Christian are you? Are you a Christian at all? Are you just a churchianic person? You just go to church. And you listen to the preacher, and on the way home he says, the most boring sermon I ever heard. You didn't listen to it. You have to listen between the lines when the preacher's preaching. You have to listen to what he's saying. You have to hear. You can listen to the words and not hear anything. But you hear what you hear if you listen with your heart and your ears and get what he's saying. What kind of Christian are you? Are you a Christ-like Christian? That's one that yields fruit. Christ is still yielding fruit. He died on the cross. He's yielded fruit every single minute of every hour of every day since he went to the cross. What is his fruit? It's people going to heaven. People going to heaven. People on their way to heaven being lifted up and helped. Hey, every Christian act that you do and that is for God and in God is a witness for God. And it will bring somebody into the place. The appendix concerning the vows. That we are living in the appendix of Christianity. What is the appendix of Christianity? Do unto those as they would do unto you? No. It's do unto those as God does unto you. And do right. And do right. No matter what a person does to you, you do right. You don't talk about them. You don't. I think probably one of the biggest wicked things in the world today is Facebook. People yield their heart out on Facebook. They show their heart as dark, black, and dingy as they talk on Facebook. Godly things are godly things. We have a couple of people in our church that put things on Facebook that are godly things. They are spiritual. They are Christian. They are godly. Those people, I believe, are going to heaven. What about those other people? I don't know some of them other people if they're saved with the stuff that they write and the stuff they say. The Bible says not to bear false witness against somebody. I see more. I don't see it at all because I don't read it. I hear from other people that do read it that say, I don't even know how to get on it. I don't know how to get on Facebook. I don't know how to get on it. All I know is that other people have say, listen, I don't know who wrote that this week on there, but that's not true. You need to be careful what you put out. Make sure it's true. God had my wife and I, bless her heart, she's in heaven now. She went to heaven in April after being married 60-something years. And God has put me to work. And now I'm having to study more, work more in the Bible, and put more of these on, and do more outreach work. And God's allowed me to be able to do that. And although I never was hindered by my wife, not ever one day was I ever hindered by my wife, she was always 100% behind everything I did. She was even behind it when it wasn't good. And she would say, well, we'll see at the other end. Sure enough, I did some things we saw bad at the other end. And so here we are, going to go in now. We're going to go in to the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. We're going into the fourth book, the book of Numbers. That will be our next excerpt. We'll see you next time. This Brother Peter saying bye-bye.